talk that we're going to have as dialogue as part of the church's DNA, right? Because oftentimes we hear that the church is missionary in its nature, that the church is dialogical, and this rethinking of the nature of the church came about especially after the Second Vatican Council. Not that before the church has not thought of itself as, as dialogical, maybe it thought of itself as more missionary, that it has a mission to evangelize. And of course, it didn't stop to have this mission. It will be, missionary church till the end of times, till the second coming of Christ, as we believe it. But with the Second Vatican Council, there is some shift in the mentality of the church. And of the church, I mean, of course, every Catholic, or at least every Christian. And why do you think that with the Second Vatican Council, we have the first time in history, we have this document, maybe you heard about it. The name of the document is Nostra Aetate. Don't confuse it with Cosa Nostra, okay? They are very similar in names, but very different in nature. So Nostra Aetate, which means in our times, it came about in the Second Vatican Council in 1960s. Why do you think it took so many centuries for the Catholic Church to say that other religions are important? Why only 20th century? Why was it so different from the centuries before? Why couldn't we have Nostra Aetate, let's say, in the 5th century or in the 10th century? By the way, how many of you are familiar with Nostra Aetate? How many of you read this document? Okay, I see Jan. Who else? Susanna, Thomas. A lot of people are familiar. It's a very short document. This document is like 4 or 5 pages, I believe. And it's actually the shortest document of the Second Vatican Council. But when it came out, this document was published by most of the press in the Western societies, like New York Times, Washington Post. Everybody talked about Nostra Aetate. Maybe people didn't talk about Lumen Gentium so much, but Nostra Aetate was really made the headlines in 1960s. So why do you think Nostra Aetate, which is a declaration about the attitude of the Catholic Church to non-Christian religions, why did it happen in the 20th century? What could be some of the reasons for that? Why 20th century?
Can I answer? Just
Sure,
a guess. Because I took this in the Catholic Seminary Franciscan. I think because of in response to the Holocaust. Yeah. So I think the Catholic Church need to clarify or to respond theologically from the crime of the Holocaust. But of course, number one because of the Holocaust, and I forgot the other reasons.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because of course the Holocaust happened, in the 20th century, and it took a lot of time for the church to rethink, what role did the church have in the Christian Europe? Because Holocaust, the Shoah, it happened in the Christian Europe. So actually Nostra Aetate was one of the attempts of the Catholic Church to reply to this horror, not to reply maybe directly, indirectly, but also to explain what position of the church is towards Judaism. And by the way, originally, the fathers of the council, the Second Vatican Council, they wanted to produce a whole document, Dei Judei, on Judaism, on the Jews. But because of the political situations, and especially because of some of the Christian bishops, which were in the Arab countries, they said, well, if now the Vatican produces the whole document only on Judaism, we will be in trouble. We're already persecuted in the Arab countries. And so there had to be some kind of balance that the Vatican had to do, but not only talking about Judaism, but Nostra Aetate also talks about Islam and a little bit about Hinduism and Buddhism, but very, very, very little. Silwan, I saw your hand up, virtual hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with the theme of the Holocaust and the impression of the First and Second World War. There was a huge change in this thinking of even philosophy in the half of the 20th century, in the second half. Yeah, due to these experiences in the first half of the century. That's what I wanted to add.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else? Why did Nostra Aetate appear in the 20th century? And by the way, if you read Nostra Aetate, usually if you read the documents which are produced by the ecumenical councils, on every page you find a lot of references, footnotes to previous documents of the church. But this is the only document which doesn't have any footnotes referring to any past documents, only biblical reference. Why? Easy, because in the past there was no document that positively the church talked about other religions. And by the way, the Second Vatican Council was the council that has not put any anathema. It has not condemned anybody or anybody's teaching, right? In the first centuries, of course, a lot of the councils were saying anathema on this, anathema on that, the teachings. But the Second Vatican Council was the first council in history that has not anathemized any teachings. Anybody else before we continue? Why did Nostra Aetate? Okay, yes, I still see your hand up, Silvan, but I guess you already have it down, right?
It's another idea I just got. Maybe it's also a reaction onto the ecumenical dialogue between the Protestant churches and the Orthodox churches at the beginning of the 20th century, and regarding starting interreligious dialogue with the World Council of Churches. Maybe it's just an idea.
Yeah, and actually, if we think about the ecumenical dialogue as a whole, it did not start with the Catholic Church. It actually started within the Protestant communities. And actually, I don't know if somebody of you heard the name Mortalium Animos from 1928. That was an encyclical of one of the popes. And if you read this encyclical, let me see the chat box. Okay, I'll put it later. So this encyclical from 1928, it actually says if Catholics take part in the so-called ecumenical meetings, it talks very negatively about that. It says they don't belong to the church anymore. So it was very strong language of the papacy before 1960 about ecumenical movements. But again, with the Second Vatican Council, especially with Nostra Aetate, the church has shifted in its understanding, and it actually presented positively the other, Judaism, Islam, and also Oriental religions. All right, so let's see some of those slides that I have. The first one, the question is, what is dialogue? If somebody is going to answer, how would you answer? What is dialogue? What do we mean by dialogue? What comes to your mind? One word. You can also type, yes?
To meeting each
Conversation.
other.
So conversation, encounter, right? Always an encounter. Okay, what else?
Communication.
Communication, right? We're communicating in dialogue. What else?
Exchange of ideas.
Exchange of ideas. Wonderful, very wonderful.
Ability to listen others.
Ability to listen, right? Exactly. Listening is very important in dialogue because usually we tend to talk a lot, right? We talk. What about listening? How do we understand the other if we don't listen to him or to her? What else comes to your mind?
Shared experience.
Yes, sharing ideas, we said before, but also sharing your experience. And in experience can be very different. Experience sometimes can be, traumatic experience. And this is part of our human existence. So, not only sharing good things, but also sometimes sharing bad memories. This is also part of dialogue. What else?
Topics for discussion.
Box. Yes, what did you say? Sorry.
Open discussion.
Open discussion. Mm-hmm. All right.
Equality.
Okay. Wonderful.
Build the bridges.
Can you say it again, please?
Build the bridges.
Building bridges. Yes, we build bridges by dialoguing. All right. And if I would ask you what dialogue is not, what would you say it's not?
I would say confrontation.
Confrontation, yes, it cannot be confrontation. Okay.
talking without listening.
Yeah, so it's all of these things that we said, but the opposite of them, right? So it's not sharing experience. And by the way, sharing experience also involves our emotions, our feelings, which also have sometimes an important role in dialogue too. Also body language, right? How we dialogue with the other, how we talk to the other. And especially when it comes to some of the traumatic experiences, right? Because they're not easy to share with the other, and not all people want to share these traumatic experiences. Okay, anybody else? All right, so let's come to again back to the PowerPoint. One of the questions on the PowerPoint was, maybe you can now start typing in the chat box. The question is, what are the goals of dialogue? So if you just type them in the chat box, what you think the goals are, the goals, the aims. What do we want to achieve when we dialogue with the other? Some of these things you already mentioned. You just want to crystallize them now. What could be the goals? It's understanding, comprehension, problem solving, greater understanding of the other. Yes. Bring about balanced understanding, respect, getting a broader perspective on things. So you see, there could be so many goals, so many different goals of dialogue. Reconciliation, making something clear, so explaining your position about something, which also happens through the process of dialogue. Inclusion, wonderful. Actually, we're going to have a little exercise about inclusion and interfaith dialogue. Ability to live side by side, finding out what we have in common, reaching a common goal in action, cooperation, explain your position. So many wonderful things, right? All these goals of dialogue. Explain position. Okay, very well. Accept each other as we are, determining what we're actually talking about, right? Because sometimes we talk, and if we don't define the problem, right, we can't really reach the solution because we don't really speak either the same language, not linguistically, but we're not on the same page, right, as they say it. Debunking stereotypes. Okay, very good about stereotypes. I have a few images about stereotypes. Making friends. Thank you, Oksana. Okay, great. And now the second question is, think about what are the biggest challenges in dialogue. Also, please start typing them, the challenges. What are the problems, right? What could be the problems in dialogue? And now we are talking about broad dialogue, right? It's not only ecumenical or interfaith, but just dialogue in general. So what could be challenges in dialogue? Misunderstanding, right? We don't understand each other. Compromise, yeah. Too often we compromise today, and especially politicians do it, right? We see compromises are everywhere, especially compromises with the truth, which is very dangerous. Defend my arguments, yeah. Yeah, actually, this is a good point about defending your arguments. When we start to defend our arguments, this is not dialogue. This is more like a debate, right? Political debates. You know, when politicians debate with each other, they're not dialoguing. They want to say, I am right and you are wrong. This is what happens in debates. Don't slip, just argue. Overcoming prejudice, suspicion. Yeah, so these are cultural diversity, might also be a challenge to dialogue. Hostility, overcoming rigid ways of thinking. Yeah, wonderful. All right, and now let's go a little bit into the ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. There are two different types of dialogue, right? Of course, the goal of ecumenical dialogue, as I guess you all agree, is to create one visible church, right? That's the goal of ecumenism, that Christians become one as Jesus Christ is one. And the goal of interreligious dialogue is different, right? You can say that the goal of interreligious dialogue, it's all the things that you mentioned before, but it's not unity, because I mean, unity is not, religious unity is impossible. I mean, religions are really are really different. We are all different. And a quick question, why do you think we're all different? Why is Bogdan different from Hadje? Why are you different? You can either say it aloud or you can, God's will to be so. Oh, wonderful. That's a good theological answer, right? God's will is diversity. That's a good one. All right. Because oftentimes I have a lot of students at the Ukrainian Catholic University, and it takes a lot of time to them to say, this is the God's will. And I say, well, you're at Catholic University, this should be the first thing that comes to your mind. Diversity is something that God is willing. Okay, so of course, with interreligious dialogue, we don't want one religion to appear. Maybe there are some people, who like syncretism, like people from the New Age. You heard about New Age, I'm sure, right? They want to combine every spirituality, and they would say Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and you name it. They want to say we are all one, and it's all kumbaya. We're all one community. We pray to the same God, but true or authentic dialogue, at least from the Catholic Christian perspective, it's not to create one religion. It's not to confound our identities. It's not to mingle them together. When we enter into dialogue, we want our identity to be clear and precise. Otherwise, if we don't have any identity, it's going to be very difficult to dialogue, because who do we represent, right? I identify as a Greek Catholic, as Christian, so I know who I am, right? Unfortunately, very often what I see in Europe, especially in some of the secular segments of society, when you talk about identity, a lot of people, especially if you ask them about the religious identity, they say, oh, well, I don't have any religious identity at all. And for me, it's really sad, because, how can you not have any identity, right? It's very, very sad. So let's do this little exercise. Maybe each one of you has a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper. Okay, if you do have it, then see this slide that I have. And you have these 6 circles. In the middle circle, you can just draw it very quickly on a piece of paper that you have. So in the middle circle, you write your name. So if you're Katarina, you write Katarina. If you're Martina, you write Martina, right? If you're Jan, you write Jan, and so on. So in the middle circle, you write your name, which is easy, right? Everybody knows their names. And in the other 5 circles, you write the things that you mostly identify with. It could be your religion, your nationality, your profession, whatever, you name it. So 5 things that are part of your identity, essential part of your identity. Because as we said, identity is very important in dialogue. Okay, anyone finished with this? All right, good. I see some people nodding. And now try to make a hierarchy of these identities. So in other words, if you wrote human, and if you think that being human is the most important part of your identity, put number 1. Okay, if you think that human is the least important part of your identity, put number 5. So just sort of prioritize or make a hierarchy of these identities. You can tell I'm Catholic. I like hierarchies, right? I won't be calling out names, but if somebody wants to share what he or she wrote and which part was easier, either to write your identities or to hierarchize, to prioritize them. If anybody wants to share that, if it's not too personal, please go ahead. Because I believe we already have a safe space where you can share personal stories, and you've been meeting already for a couple of meetings, so you're not total strangers, except for me. I just appeared today. So if somebody wants to share what he or she wrote, go ahead. Emanuele. Like,
Man, priest, Italian, Christian, Catholic.
Christian Catholic. Okay, interesting. Which was more difficult for you to do, to write, to fill in the 5 circles, or to prioritize, or it was easy for you?
A little difficult, yeah. It's not
To
easy.
prioritize? Okay, sure, thank you. Anybody else?
I can next if you want to.
Yes, Ilan.
The difficult part was to prioritize. I'm not sure if I still like it, what I did, but first is Greek Catholic / Byzantine. Second is arts. Third is literature. 4 is food, and 5 is family.
Okay, nice. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And one more person can share. So we have gender balance. Maybe somebody. Yes, Vera.
For me, it was more difficult to prioritize, to rate it, than to put these names. So, and I did it like this: the first mom, then Christian, Catholic, which I'm not sure now which is better, and then psychologist, friend, woman, and friend.
Okay, thanks so much. Thank you for sharing this. Yeah, so again, going back to identity. Now, identities are really essential in dialogue. And when we enter into dialogue with the other, of course, we might sort of be selective sometimes, right, in which identity we want to put forward, right? But we don't mingle, or we don't erase our identities when we dialogue with the other, and especially when it comes to interreligious dialogue. Some of you before mentioned that there is one of the aims of dialogue is to break stereotypes, to break the prejudices, which are there, and we have to admit that there are a lot of stereotypes, a lot of prejudices. And I want to show you an image. Maybe some of you know this image. Can you see it? Yes. Okay. How many of you know what these 2 statues are? Okay.
The church, synagogue.
Oh, you said it right away. I just wanted to hear, to wait for the people. Okay, so the church and the synagogue. Okay, so maybe somebody can explain to me what he or she sees if you've never seen this image before. If you are Padre Manuel, you just be quiet, you don't say what you see on this image. So what do you see? Somebody who has never seen this image before. Katarina, have you seen this image before? Those 2 statues?
I can go.
Okay, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah, so the church, she's carrying the cross, and the chalice, and then she's wearing a crown. And then the synagogue, I don't know if that's like a broken staff, or I don't know, maybe it reminds me of like the bronze serpent, but then she's blindfolded to Christ or to the truth, or yeah.
Yeah, so the woman to the right, at least on the picture, is blindfolded, the eyes are closed. And you mentioned in her hand, she has a staff or a stick. And actually, that might be the spear that broke Christ's, the side of Christ, the side of Christ's body when he was crucified. And also you can see that in her hand, another hand, this woman, the blindfolded woman, she's holding a book, right? You see a book, and the book is almost slipping from her hand. For somebody who has not seen this image before, what kind of emotions or feelings do you get from these 2 statues? How would you describe what you see? So we just gave the details, right? We said there is a crown, there is a chalice, there is a cross, then there is a book falling from one hand or the other. statue, she's blindfolded. What kind of emotions do these statues?
For me, it kind of looks, I don't know why, but I kind of get this feeling that the one on the left is superior to the one on the right. It's kind of looking down on it, and it's, well, because it's not blindfolded and because it's more, I don't know, powerfully dressed, I guess. So that's the feeling, I guess, get this superiority.
Yeah, so the feeling of superiority, the sense of superiority, looking down on the other, right? And the other sort of shied away or looking down or even blindfolded, right? Okay, very good. What else? What kind of other feelings or emotions can you see here in this art? This is art. This is statues, right? Stone statues. But you can get a lot of emotions from them too.
Maybe I'm influenced by our previous activity, but I can see a kind of dialogue in it when the woman on the left is trying to speak to the other one, but she isn't able to listen. So,
And what makes you think that she's not able to listen or she's not willing to listen? What makes you say that? Why do you think that's
because she's averting her head.
Okay, so she's turning down or turning away her head, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so she doesn't want to listen. That's the feeling we get from this. Okay, very well. Anybody else before?
I'm guessing that the book is the law, like the old law. But then also, like, this image carries, I don't know, maybe it might carry strong anti-Semitic tones. But I'm not sure from what time period it is or anything like that. But yeah, that's also another thing to think of. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Father Emmanuel, would you like to explain again what these two statues are? You already said that this is church, ecclesia, and synagoga. The church and the synagogue. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Where do we have the statues, or more or less which period of time? You're on mute, so unmute your mic. Thanks.
It's a traditional imaging to show the difference between the church that is winner and growing up, and the synagogue that she can't see, and the way to go to salvation, and is a traditional stereotype is negative image to show the Hebrew people, and is a middle age imagine, and for describe the synagogue and then the religion, the Hebrew religion.
Yeah, thank you. And you said, it's traditional, right? So it was almost not in every church, but in a lot of cathedrals in Europe in the Middle Ages, you could find those two statues. And of course, for the people who maybe were illiterate, they could not read, but they saw those two statues. And of course, one triumphalistic, the ecclesia, the church, is, wearing the crown, being very regal, and the other one looking down, showing her inferiority. So that was, as you said, traditional representation of the other, full of prejudices, full of stereotypes. And unfortunately, this image, again, it was on the churches, on the cathedrals. So maybe, and maybe for sure, this image, it contributed to a lot of anti-Semitic feelings throughout the ages. But thankfully, thanks God, we had the Second Vatican Council. And again, as I said in the beginning, with Nostra Aetate, the Church has shifted completely her attitude towards the other. And I want to show you another statue, two statues from 2015. And these are the statues which were actually, I think they were put up in Philadelphia, one of the Catholic universities campuses. And here you can see the church, the synagogue, ecclesia and synagoga, sitting, talking to each other on equal footing. You don't have the sense of superiority. you have a total different understanding. So in a nutshell, the whole history of interreligious dialogue can be shown on those two images. The first one, where the church saw herself as superior, as triumphalistic, and seeing this image where the church says, no, there are also elements of truth and salvation in other religions. This is what Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium say. The fathers of the council, they wrote, we believe that in the other religions, we have elements of truth and salvation. They didn't specify those elements, but you can think of what these elements are, like ethical teachings, moral precepts, commandments. Those are the things that we have in common with the followers of other religions. Anybody wants to comment on those two statues, or maybe have a question, or you disagree with what was said before? Remember, this is a dialogue space, so anybody can say things you feel or you want to say. Everybody happy, right?
In common, there is Holy Scripture, the Hebrew Bible, the rule, and the book is the Gospel and the Bible, the Gospel.
Yeah, you see the Torah, right? The Jewish scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, and the Gospels, of course, the New Testament. And you see those two women the statues looking at each other's scriptures. So sort of when you look at something, of course, you want to learn, as I'm looking at your faces, right? Some of the faces are very curious, so you really want to learn about what's there in the book. So here's also the type of dialogue you can sense that we have shown through the statues themselves. Thanks, Father.
Can I comment something, please?
Sure, George, go ahead.
Yeah, there is someone with a scroll and this other one with the Bible, I presume, and they are seated down, more of saying we are at one level, and so we can be able to share together at one level.
Yeah, these are very good points, because the first two statues, we saw them standing. One was sort of looking superior, right? And here they are seated and they are learning from each other and learning about the other. Thank you, George. Where are you from, by the way, because I didn't have a chance to have you introduced. All right. If we talk about, sorry, my computer is going crazy with this heat. If we talk about the theological foundations for dialogue, what would you say are some of these theological foundations for dialogue? If you talk about theology, right? You can type them in the chat box or again say it out loud. Because we as theologians, right, we have to think theologically and we have to find those theological bases in order to dialogue with the other. Here you have this icon of the Holy Trinity, right? The Most Holy Trinity. And I think it's the whole concept of Trinity, the whole belief of Trinity is a perfect model for Christians, for Catholics to be involved in dialogue. Because what is Trinity? I mean, it's not easy to explain what Trinity is, right? How do we explain Trinity? And especially if you dialogue with Muslims or the Jews, it's just unimaginable. I mean, you can't talk about the Trinity because sometimes Muslims, especially, they would accuse us that we are not absolute monotheists, right? Because we have triune God, we have three gods, or how do you explain it to them? And I find it difficult personally to explain. But as a Catholic, as a Christian, for me, the most fundamental theological element or base for dialogue is the belief in the Holy Trinity. Because if you think about the Trinity, it's the eternal dialogue among the three persons who have the same nature. So I think if we take that as the foundation for theological dialogue, we will go very far. Anybody has questions or comments or any feedback? Feel free to jump in. Now, Paul Watson, who was one of the founders of Ecumenical Dialogue, he said that dialogue is one of the biggest inventions of the 20th century. And I already mentioned to you the Nostra Aetate declaration of the Second Vatican Council about the relations of the Catholics to non-Christians, but also another important theological document that has the word dialogue almost in every single paragraph is encyclical of Pope Paul VI, Ecclesiam Suam, the Paths of the Church. I find this encyclical really extraordinary. How many of you have heard about this encyclical? I'm sure Padre Emmanuel did, right? You know about Ecclesiam Suam. Anybody else heard about it? I really invite you to read it. It's such a rich encyclical about understanding of dialogue, and a lot of these encyclicals, it was actually inserted into or integrated in the teachings of the Second Vatican Council. Now, Pope Paul VI, he says that there are those circles of dialogue. He says, first of all, there's humanity. The church is supposed to dialogue with all humanity because we share this humanity with every single person. Then he says, then there is a circle of all believers. Then there is another one, which is the followers of monotheistic religions. And he specifically talks about Judaism and Islam. Then he talks about Christians. So here he refers to the ecumenical dialogue. And then he talks about the Catholics. So we as Catholics, we also should dialogue with one another, because sometimes, you know, it seems that dialogue between Greek Catholics and Roman Catholics is more difficult than the dialogue between Catholics and Jews or Muslims. Why do you think that could be the case? The dialogue within one confession is more difficult than the dialogue between different religions. Why could that be the case? Any ideas?
As it usually happens, that it's more difficult to have dialogue and good relationships, to maintain good relationships in the family, with closest people you live in colleagues or friends or neighbors.
Exactly, Vera, because, you know, we sort of live under the same roof, right? We share the same teachings, we share the same authority, so we are family. And, you know, fights within family can be more difficult to handle than the fights between neighbors, let's put it this way. Yeah, but that's a good point. All right, any questions so far, or comments or feedback? Everybody good?
Was this released before Nostra Aetate or after?
It was before. It was just before, yes.
Okay, because it somewhat follows the same format, right? Of
yeah, very similar. So it was a great influence on Nostra Aetate. Yeah, maybe if we have a chance, we can read the first paragraph of Nostra Aetate, and you can see sort of the thread of thinking that is following the thread of thinking of Pope Paul VI. But again, I invite you to read this encyclical, because this is really fundamental encyclical to understand the position of the Catholic Church in dialogue. This has been translated into different languages. Unfortunately, not Ukrainian so far, but the Institute of Religion and Society of the Ukrainian Catholic University is working on that. So maybe next year we'll have the Ukrainian translation as well. But of course, it's in English or Latin if you prefer to read Latin. All right. So a little bit about the situation, interreligious situation in Ukraine itself. As Father Roman mentioned to you in the beginning, for a number of years, I have personally worked with the mayor of Lviv, Andriy Sadovay, as his advisor in religious and ecumenical issues. Now, when I started to work at the city council, what I noticed was that if one religious community organizes some kind of event, for example, if Greek Catholics organize some event at the city, usually it's only Greek Catholics who come to this event. And the same goes for Orthodox and Protestants and so on. So my idea was to form a neutral platform where every person who believes or who wants to have dialogue with the other can come and take part in these events. So in 2013, I founded, as Father Roman said, this Center for Interreligious and Interconfessional Understanding. And it was well attended by a lot of people. And here you have bishops, you have priests of different confessions and religions. And also here a very interesting photo of the three bishops of the three Christian traditions. The Greek Catholic bishop, the Orthodox bishop of Kiev Patriarchate and of Moscow Patriarchate, who also were present at this event. And on the next picture, you also see there is a Muslim mufti, there is a rabbi. So all of them attended the opening of the center. And in the past almost 10 years, the center, the Libertas Center in Ukraine, we have had a number of different intercultural and interreligious dialogue events. And to be honest, a lot of young people are interested in the question of interreligious dialogue, but also, as we mentioned in the beginning, there are so many obstacles and challenges and misunderstandings, because some of the people think that when we organize an interfaith or interreligious dialogue event, people want to come and form one religion. So in other words, they want to mingle or to integrate or to change their identities. And of course, we don't have that aim with the center. Did anybody of you take part in any interfaith encounters, or you created interfaith friendships? Maybe you took part in academic conferences, or maybe it was even a friendship that was developed with you and, let's say, a Jewish person or a Muslim person. Hadia, go ahead. You raised the hand.
Yes, Prof. I was invited to be part of this interfaith movement in the Philippines to address issues, especially in the so-called religious conflict in the southern Philippines, because we have this Muslim and Christian conflict. But it's not actually religious, but it's more political and land issue. And I'm also part of the Palestinian. When I was invited by WCC, the World Council of Churches, to be part of the Human Rights Observer in Palestinian territories in Gaza Strip, in the borders. So yeah, thank you, bro.
Thanks for sharing. Anybody else? Or you know that somebody, yes, Vera.
My experience, just a moment. About 10 years ago, there was the same situation in our small town, Mukachevo, in that if something was going on in the state, for example, an opening of something, and they just invited only our city authority invited only Orthodox Church. Then sometimes Catholic Church, only traditional church. And then I got this idea from Folklore movement about this ecumenical dialogue and everything, and we started working together and invited all these different denominations. There were about 8 or 9, and now this city authority, when they once a month they invite our group, we meet regularly, by the way. And it's nice that everyone takes part in this making decisions anyway, everything. And we have become friends, and we went in a few years ago to this Ecumenical Congress in Rome, and now it's quite a different situation, and I like it a lot.
So it became more inclusive, as you said, right? You started to include the other communities. Thank you. Matthew, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I'm a university student. I'm a Roman Catholic, but I have friends who are Orthodox and Protestant. And actually, one of the things that I think we did together that sort of opened up some good conversations is attending a Greek Catholic liturgy together. So yeah, even going to liturgy together, or other religious services.
Right. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. And here on the picture that I'm sharing with you, you can see this a very interesting and very important project that the center did a few years ago. It was a rehabilitation programs for children who came from different religious confessions, not religions, but confessions, Orthodox, Protestants, and Catholics. And we organized for them, of course, it was not a theological academic lecture, right? We cannot lecture to the children, but what we did for them and for their mothers, for the widows, we organized this rehabilitation program in one of the monasteries where we had a prayer, we had a psychologist who worked with the children. So we see in interfaith and ecumenical dialogue, there is a lot of room for creativity and fantasy where you can work theologically, right? But also you can do things that address societal problems. Or for instance, another interesting project that we did a couple of years ago, let me show you the picture, was the School of Interreligious Dialogue. It was a very interesting project because, of course, as you're aware, you know, in the world now there is so many fake news and so much propaganda. So what we did, we gathered together Christians, journalists, Muslim journalists, and Jewish journalists. They trained together on how to differentiate between the fake news on the social media, and then they trained their journalists. This project was very actually creative and innovative, and for this project we received an award from the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for innovation, because we brought interfaith dialogue to fight fake news and propaganda. Now what I want to do is I'll share a link with you now, and you can open this link on your computer, and we will do 4 or 5 breakout rooms. And in each room, you'll have 4 or 5 people, and each group will have a specific question that you're invited to discuss within your own group. The question is always about interreligious dialogue and inclusion, okay? Usually, if we didn't have the Zoom format, we would be sitting on different coffee tables, having coffees or tea or water or juice, but we call them virtual tables here, okay? So let me share the link for you, and you should be able to access this link. It's on Drive.